Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Kayla and it's time to crack into a good book. So today's video is going to hopefully be the last of the 10 recent reads wrap-ups that I'll be doing before switching over to the weekly reading updates. Though of course now, I'm just behind in filming in general, so now I'm behind in the weekly updates, so we'll see what I end up doing. But today we have, obviously 10 books to talk about, and these are books 12 and 13 that I read in December, and then books 1 through 8 that I've read in January. So December was definitely a lower reading month for me. 13 books is definitely lower than my usual, so that was a little unfortunate, but it was kind of, I think, nice to be able to do other things as well, like watch holiday movies and do sort of Christmassy things. This is not going to be a particularly heavy sci-fi and fantasy one, but I think there are still a lot of really great books here. So let's go ahead and get started. And like always, we'll move our way from the lowest rated to the highest. So the first book I'll talk about today is a 2-star rating, and that's Renaissance Man by Tessa Bailey. So this is a romance book, and it's just a very short story. I think it's something like 60 pages. But the premise here is that we have this ex-soldier at a Renaissance festival who ends up joining the joust in order to win a date with this girl Cameron, and both of these characters are not really thrilled that she is the prize for winning the joust. So that's essentially it. And the whole reason I was interested in this to begin with, it was that it took place at a Renaissance festival, and I love Renaissance festivals, so that was what really drew me in. And I did like this setting, but it was over way too quickly for me. And again, it's only 60 pages, but I kind of thought it would take place the entire time at the Renaissance festival, but it really didn't. So that was unfortunate. And in general, I thought this was way too insta-lovey. And I get it, it's a romance novella, what was I really expecting? But it just progressed way too quickly. It just escalated to marriage real fast. And I was I don't really feel this at all. And there's this whole premise, I think, of this soldier guy, Kyle, entering the joust, was frankly a little ridiculous. That the Renaissance Festival is letting people without training, not only do sword fights, but also joust, that's incredibly dangerous. The ending was just really out of place and super rushed. So there are some heavier topics like PTSD that are brought up in here, but then it doesn't really explore this because it's far too short. And, I just didn't particularly connect with the characters. Then this is the, I think, second book by Tessa Bailey that I've read before. Something about the character dynamics in her books just really doesn't fit well with me. So I don't know, it kind of just makes me feel uncomfortable for whatever reason. So I think that, maybe Tessa Bailey just isn't the author for me. So now we move to the 3-star books, and the first one I'll talk about here is Subhuman by Michael McBride. So this, I think I would describe as a horror/thriller. And the basic premise here is that we have this research station in Antarctica, and some scientists discover ruins of a lost civilization that hold the key to these strange mutations seen in bones around the world. And essentially we have a predator that awakens and then hunts the humans as prey. So I really suggest do not read the synopsis on Goodreads too closely, because it kind of spoils a lot of it. So go off of what I think I have just said to you, and if that sounds interesting, go from there. But I think the pacing was way off for me. The first half is incredibly science heavy, and don't get me wrong, I love science, that is not an issue for me, but in trying to, I think, justify the creature's existence, it just goes almost to a point of into a dumpiness, and just is really overwhelming. So I think it could have been a bit toned down, I think. And essentially by the time the creature finally arrives in the second half, I was just kind of okay, just a little apathetic, which is unfortunate because I did like the creature. There are lots of different characters and shifting points of view, so I think this was also a bit of a struggle that I had with this book. It's really hard to keep everyone straight, and I just essentially have no connection with anyone. The stakes for me were not as high as I would have liked in terms of, characters actually dying. There were obviously issues, I think, with this book for me, but I did enjoy this overall mystery of, these mutations that I mentioned, as well as the creatures. And I think the setting is also fantastic. You're one in Antarctica, and there's kind of this closed slash small space, so you can't really go outside to escape. So that like kind of makes things a bit more tense. And, you know, there are some generally enjoyable elements like these ruins that they find. Though I will say, like, I was a little confused at times based on the description whether or not they were underwater. I do have the second book, and, like, I am still intrigued by this creature enough to keep reading it. So we'll see if the second one improves. I am a big fan of these adventure-type novels, so I'm really hoping that his writing is not going to consistently be like this. So we shall see. The other, I think, 3-star book that I'll talk about today is Be Not Far From Me by Mindy McGinnis. So this is a YA survival thriller where our main character Ashley is hiking in the Smokies with her friends and basically catches her boyfriend with another girl, and then she like runs off because she's angry and falls into a ravine, discovers that she's lost and has to survive while also dealing with an infection. So I did enjoy it, but I will say I really struggled with the sections about her foot injury. It is pretty graphic, and I'll be honest, like, it did kind of make me feel ill at times, and I feel like I, like, have a pretty strong stomach, but this was just kind of a bit much for me. I did enjoy that Ashley is tough and, you know, is, like, very at home in the woods, and so, like, it was nice to see her put her knowledge and her skills to use. I do think that there's a bit of this, like, not like other girls type vibe, I guess, that she gives off, so, you know, she's pretty judgmental about, you know, other girls liking makeup and other things like that. So that did kind of bother me a bit. So I've kind of like waffled back and forth with like how much I really like her as a character. I did struggle with the pacing at times, which was strange because it's a pretty short book. And so like some sections were pretty quick, but I found myself like repeatedly checking how many chapters were left. That's a pretty clear indicator to me that like I did have issues with the pacing. I think some events that happened are a bit too coincidental, but I did enjoy my time with it overall. You know, I think we also get some flashbacks throughout this that I thought were fine. So basically, like, I don't know. For me, this is a book, like, I thankfully got it on sale on Kindle, but I think I would suggest, you know, borrowing it from the library if you're able to, because this is not something I think I would reread. So now we move to the 3.5-star books, and the first one I'll talk about here is The Queen's Triumph by Jessie Mihalik. So this is the third and I think final installment of the Rogue Queen series, which is kind of, it was like a serial novella type series, I guess. That Jessie Mihalik put up on her blog, I think, and then like published the story arcs all together. So like I've been reading the, I guess, collected versions. This is a sci-fi romance, and we have our queen Samara, who agrees to meet with this enemy who destroyed her ship and attacked her home, and so she has to essentially like stop him in order to keep the peace between the Empire and the Confederacy. So I do think this was still enjoyable overall, though I think that this is not my favorite of the 3 installments. The writing is excellent, as always. I find Jessie Mihalik's writing to be very funny, easy to read, and like I end up, you know, really reading for the romance. Samara continues to be fabulous. She's intelligent and this like badass main character, so I think that's like fairly typical of all of Jessie Mihalik's main female characters. They're all like very strong, awesome ladies. I also really liked the Emperor. He's very sweet and supportive, but, you know, he's still very capable himself. I think, you know, the downside of it being more of a novella length is that it's over way too soon. I do think that the beginning was a little bit slower than I was used to, but we do get some action towards the end and some new fun ships and things like that. We also have a new non-binary character who's introduced and who seems like super interesting, and I kind of like wanted to see more of them, but, you know, again, it's a novella, so I'm like, the last. I did get a little bit frustrated with Samara being, you know, kind of overprotective of her people. What I did like was that she realizes that, like, hey, communication is actually really important, and just, like, you know, letting them help her is actually a good thing, and, like, you know, like, I get wanting to protect those you care about, but it's like, these people are also very capable, badass characters, so, like, let them help you. So, yeah, overall, I enjoyed this, and, you know, I'm sad that the Rogue Queen series is over. Hopefully, you know, I'd love to read more in this universe, so hopefully, you know, that'll happen. This is definitely a series that I would recommend, especially if you're in the mood for a sci-fi romance. The next 3.5-star book I'll talk about is Siri Who Am I by Tschida. I received this for review from NetGalley, and this is a I would describe this as a contemporary where our main character Mia has short-term amnesia after an accident, so she teams up with a house sitter for her possible boyfriend in order to find out what happened to her and who she really is. So I thought this was pretty enjoyable overall. You know, it's such a fun premise. I really liked the humor throughout the book, but I do think the first part of the book was more humorous than the second part of the book, mostly because I think Mia is first trying to discover who she is and doesn't know that much about herself, so it just makes for a much funnier, I guess, introduction. There's also footnotes throughout the book, and I found these to be pretty funny, though, like, I will say, in the arc that I read, the formatting was a little off sometimes in terms of like the placement. So I'm assuming they have fixed this, by the final edition. And this did just come out January 12th, by the way. I also just generally liked this exploration of social media. Like Mia uses Instagram in order to try to figure out clues about herself, which I thought was really funny. And then it also, dives into influencer culture, which I think is pretty interesting. In terms of the pacing, I did consistently want to keep reading the book, which I think is always good. I kind of mentioned this, with the humor. I don't think the second part was nearly as strong for me as the first part. I think, and it's mostly because, Mia has discovered more about herself, and she has some traits, I think, that I don't necessarily like. And, in terms of her journey, I think it was generally enjoyable, but I would have liked to see more change from her because she is definitely full of herself. And I don't know, I kind of wanted to see her be more like who she is at the beginning of the book when she doesn't really know too much about herself. Like, she's a lot nicer, I think, at the beginning. She is very snarky, which I found generally enjoyable. In terms of some of the other characters, my favorite by far was Max. He's a postdoc working in a neuroscience lab, and he's studying lying, which was very interesting. We got some fun sciencey bits, and he's just so sweet and supportive. He also wears these silly nerd shirts and nerdy science shirts and things like that. So I don't know, I just found him so relatable and adorable. Overall, I did have a fun time with this, and I would recommend it if you're looking for a fun, lighter sort of read. So now we get into the 4-star books, and the first one I'll talk about here is All Your Twisted Secrets by Diana Urban. So this is a YA thriller, and essentially we have a group of characters. So we have the queen bee, the star athlete, a loner, a music geek, characters like that, who are all invited to this scholarship dinner, only to discover that they're actually locked in and they have to choose someone to kill or otherwise they all die. So that is, quite the premise. I found it to be engaging throughout the book, and I definitely wanted to keep reading to find out what happened. And this was kind of, I read this starting at my, I guess, feeling a little bit slumpy. So I was like, okay, maybe, thrillers would be helpful. And I definitely read this quickly, so I felt, less slumpy, I guess, than I had been. I really liked this locked room mystery premise, finding out the connections between everybody. We did get dual timelines for this, not only obviously in the present when they're trapped in the room, but also the past building up to the point where they're in the room to kind of establish the character dynamics and give us hints about, why are all these characters together? Our main character, Amber, is this music geek, and she composes her own music. I thought this was really awesome because I've never really read, I think, books that have a main character who composes music, but she also listens to soundtracks that are appropriate to whatever occasion that she's in. And I thought that this was relatable because I also really enjoy listening to movie soundtracks. The Lord of the Rings soundtrack is awesome, Pirates of the Caribbean, the Witcher soundtrack is really great. So I find myself listening to those while I work or do other things. So I was yes, this is wonderful. I love this little tidbit about our main character. I did eventually figure out what was going on, but I didn't immediately guess it, so that was nice. I thought it was just really interesting to see how the different characters react to this situation of being locked in and possibly having to choose someone to kill. It certainly makes for some tense moments. In terms of the past sections, it does feel more like a contemporary than a thriller, but I still found these really interesting. I don't know if I necessarily liked it quite as much as the present timeline, but it was still enjoyable. This book does address themes like bullying, suicide, and the importance of having to deal with consequences of your actions. So yeah, I do think that this was a really fun time. I don't know if it'll necessarily stick with me, but I'm glad that I read it. The next 4-star book that I'll talk about is Blood of Elves by Andrzej Sapkowski. So Ivy and I recently did a whole discussion video about this book, so I feel like I'm going to link that down below. And so I would suggest, if you want more detailed thoughts, go check that out. So I'll try to keep this kind of short since I've already done that video. But this is the first main book of the Witcher series, and fighting has begun amongst the humans, dwarves, elves, gnomes. We have Siri, who is this prophecy child, and she's being hunted for her powers, and so the Witcher Geralt must protect her. So I really enjoyed listening to the audiobook. I thought the narrator did a great job of conveying the humor and doing the different voices. I just generally like this world. It's pretty bleak and full of monsters, but I really like this idea of these witchers and these sorceresses. It is sometimes hard to distinguish the timeline, and Ivy and I went into a little bit more detail in our discussion video. It does feel like it's a lot of setup in establishing this main storyline, which seems to be more focused on Siri. So I am interested in seeing what happens next. And I will say, Geralt is missing for larger chunks of this book than I anticipated. I did focusing on Siri. She's an enjoyable character. She's definitely tough and eager to learn. So I am curious to see more about her role in the prophecy. So yeah, so those are some quick thoughts. So now we'll move on to another 4-star book, which is Two Can Keep a Secret by Karen M. McManus. This is another YA thriller. And we have Ellery and her twin who end up moving to this small town to live with their grandmother. However, this town is hiding some secrets, including some missing girls. Someone has essentially promised to make homecoming as dangerous as it was 5 years ago when one of these girls vanished. So I thought that this was quite enjoyable. This is my first Karen M. McManus book, and I definitely want to check out more of her work. The writing is definitely easy to read and easy to get into. I thought the pace moved along quite nicely, and I just definitely wanted to keep returning to it and figure out what was going on. I had a completely different hypothesis of what was happening, so this definitely surprised me, and I really liked that. I can usually guess at least some tidbits of what's going on, but this this just was a bit of a blind spot for me, honestly. I totally thought something else was going to happen. We have 2 points of view characters, obviously Ellery, and we also have Malcolm, who is a local boy. I definitely preferred Ellery's sections. I think she's much more interesting. She's wary of trusting people, I think, for understandable reasons. And she also has this obsession with true crime, which I found pretty relatable. I find that fascinating myself. And I really liked just seeing her try to figure out what's going on. Malcolm is definitely a bit of a loner, and he struggles to make close friends. So, even though I didn't like him as much as Ellery, I still appreciated getting his perspective. Following different characters kind of allows you to piece together some parts. And, looking back on the book, obviously, now knowing what happens, there were definitely some things that, I kind of just brushed aside at the time and was like, oh, okay, that's probably not a big deal. Wrong. So, yeah, we do have a bit of a developing romance here, but it's not insta-love. I felt very satisfied with it, and it felt more natural. I also really just enjoy that there is this, horror theme park in this town. It's just, such a fun and creepy detail. So, yeah, I definitely recommend this book, and I will be reading more from this author. I think last of the 4-star books I'll talk about today is The Wife Upstairs by Rachel Hawkins. So I did receive this for review from NetGalley. I would describe this as a thriller and loose retelling of Jane Eyre. So we have Jane, who is a dog walker in this fancy gated community in Alabama. So she's definitely down on her luck until she meets Eddie Rochester, who is recently widowed, and his wife died in a boating accident. As they fall for each other, Jane is definitely haunted by the legend of Bee, this wife, and how can she live up to Bee's legacy, I guess. So I definitely enjoyed my time with this. I thought this southern setting of Alabama was quite fun and definitely felt pretty realistic, especially this southern lifestyle brand that Bee has. And I just I really liked that Jane has moved from Phoenix to Birmingham, and mostly because, I'm from Arizona and now live in North Carolina. And, obviously North Carolina is not Alabama, but it's, a similar journey from, Arizona to the South. So I just thought that was, a particularly appealing touch for me. I would describe this as more of a slow burn thriller, but I thought that the pacing worked pretty well for me overall. I will say there are some slow moments in here, but I don't think that this detracted from the story for me. I really enjoyed learning about the backgrounds of both Jane and Bee and just kind of figuring out some of the things that were going on. Like, I definitely thought that was just so much fun. So, like I mentioned, this is kind of a loose retelling of Jane Eyre. Some of the plot points are a bit predictable if you've read that story. However, for me, Jane Eyre is one of the few classics that I actually quite enjoy. So I didn't really mind that I knew, I think the overall structure of the story. And, I think this take on Jane was quite interesting. Again, she comes from this kind of rough background, but she also steals from her rich clients. So I thought that was just kind of fun. And it was a weird situation where, she's definitely hiding things and has some negative traits, but at the same time, I still kind of liked her and rooted for her. So that was just, it was always interesting. And then I think in terms of Eddie, he's certainly more than he appears, but I enjoyed this take on him as well. And I think that they are actually quite well matched. So it was enjoyable to read about both of them. There are some content warnings here for abuse, but in general, I had a really great time with this book and would certainly recommend it. So The Wife Upstairs also did just come out, so you can go ahead and get your copy of that. So now we move to the 5-star books, and the only one I'll talk about here is Shipped by Angie Hockman. So I did receive this for a review from NetGalley, and this is a romance that was just so cute. Oh my god, I loved it so much. So we have an enemies to lovers romance where co-workers Henley and Graham must go on this cruise to compete for a promotion, essentially. So they really hate each other, but they've never actually met in person. Until now. So, Henley discovers that Graham isn't quite who she expected and starts to question some of her life choices. So I thought that this was so cute and enjoyable. The pacing is fantastic. I read it in an evening because I was just I need to know what happens next. I love this so much. And, I think in terms of the writing, it's really funny, and I actually did find myself snorting because I was laughing so much. So, I think that's definitely a bonus. The setting is fantastic. I think the cruise itself feels really realistic to what actually some of these, smaller cruises are like. And I really liked that they're in the Galapagos Islands. We do get some fun tropical activities, like snorkeling and kayaking. And for me, those are both activities that I really enjoy. So I thought that this was, just relatable and just so much fun to see these sorts of things portrayed in the book. The romance was also just lovely. The banter is great between our characters, and I just hardcore shipped them. So, I really wanted them to get together. And each of them are just so great on their own as well. Henley is definitely a really hard worker. She works her butt off at her job, but she's also taking classes in the evenings in order to get a degree. And I can really respect how she wants to not only be good at her job, but also still be is this really the right career path for me? Should I change things up a bit? Graham is just so sweet, and he's definitely intelligent and really funny. And we also get really great side characters as well. We also have Henley's sister who, plays a role in this book. And I didn't really like her at first, but by the end of the book, I really came around to enjoying her and rooting for her too. In terms of some of the other cruise members, there are some really funny people, and this made for just some absolutely hilarious moments. I'm thinking of one in particular that just stood out to me where I was just I'm dying right now. This is so funny. So, we do have some lighter, fluffier moments, and I mentioned, it's really funny, but we do have some heavier themes as well. And I just really liked the exploration of these. We get things like sexism in the workplace, abusive relationships, death of a family member. So I think all of these were handled quite well, and I really liked the resolution of all of these, in terms of what happens in the book. We also have an overall message of conservation, which I think is really important, and I just really liked seeing it here. So in general, I would recommend this to anybody. I had such a good time with it and really loved it. So, if you're looking for just such a fun, feel-good romance, I would highly suggest picking this up. And it did just come out, so, you can get your copy right now. So with that, those are the 10 books that I have to talk to you about today. Let me know in the comments if you've read any of these books or think you might pick them up. And for your question of the day, have you done things like snorkeling and kayaking, and do you enjoy them? So with that, I do have a Discord channel, and if you want to join that, the link is in the description below. I hope you're all having an excellent day and are reading something awesome. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to give it a big thumbs up, as that would certainly help me out. But with that, I think I'm going to wrap it up here and see you in the next one.